This week on Crunch Week, Taylor Swift shakes off Spotify, and Sean Rad gets demoted at Tinder. I'm Kyle Russell, and I'm joined this week by two of TechCrunch's New York reporters, Jordan Crook and Anthony Ha, or Tony, as we like to call him.
That is the opposite of the
Yo,
truth,
Tone.
Kyle.
I'm sorry, Anthony. So anyway, this week we've got a short episode. We're all a little pressed for time. So we're going to be talking first off about Taylor Swift leaving Spotify. She apparently had only like one of her recent tracks on Shake It Off on Spotify before this, and then took off all of her backlog. Is that correct?
Right, so she had the back catalog, the album came out, and then
And the single.
And people were disappointed that the full album wasn't on there, and then she just took everything off.
She took everything off.
She escalated it. It escalated quickly.
It was a dramatic reaction, maybe, but she's come out and said that she thinks that Spotify is more of an experiment in the music industry, and that she doesn't feel like it fairly compensates the people who create the music, including herself. And so she wants to sell the album. She also said in that interview, though, that like her main goal is to like break all these records of like selling the most albums and stuff, which is great. And I'm really glad that she's doing that and breaking all those records. But I just feel like for someone who's so successful and can attribute most of that back to her audience and her fans, it just seems a little bit greedy to me. But
Fundamentally, it's a business decision. And I mean, if people want to get the music, they still can, which is something else you did point out in your post. I mean, if you want to go to YouTube, you can listen to a good portion of the album. But it just seemed, like a flawed business decision as well, in the sense of, again, that maybe she's not making a ton of money from Spotify, but on the flip side, I mean, she's probably making less money from YouTube ads.
and she's opening herself up to more potential fans, so there's that too.
So that's I want to push out. I guess the fundamental issue is several artists, okay, let's say actually many artists, every couple of months it seems like there's one big artist who comes forward and says, Spotify is a raw deal compared to album sales that we were used to. You just don't make as much money for the number of listeners you have. So it seems like the market, though, is shifting towards streaming as just the standard way most of us get our music. So if a bunch of artists were to push back against that system and say, no, we're not going to be on these streaming services, we're going back to iTunes, would that be enough to shift user behavior, or has the market already moved too much?
I think that iTunes, or like if we're talking about buying an album the fair way, I guess, which is what people would consider the iTunes way now, I don't think that that's enough. I think streaming is definitely where people are going to want to go.
Right. Well, I could imagine that, it might be enough on a one-off basis that, you could get a lot of people who haven't bought an album on iTunes to buy these specific albums from these specific artists. But as a way to shift long-term behavior, I think that's going to be pretty tough. I think also, people, they're not perfect parallels, but if you think about sort of the Netflix example, it seems like people are also just willing to a certain extent to just kind of suck it up and accept a worse content selection, for a lower price.
It's true.
So there was another side of this narrative. Business Insider did a report saying that, it was actually the record labels looking to sell or something, and, they really wanted to increase the value by saying, look, we have more album sales right now because she shifted over to that business model, and they thought that would be a good metric to have before going through that process.
Right. I remember reading that, and I think it sounds like a plausible narrative. Of course, anytime someone leaks something anonymously, there's usually some sort of agenda, but that doesn't mean it's not true. I totally find that to be plausible as well. But Taylor Swift has gone on record saying that she also supports the decision, so it's clearly not just this sort of Machiavellian behind-the-scenes business move.
And also, to be fair, her album sale predictions were down, so there is some sort of grain of truth to whatever might have been going on with the record labels, because predictions for this particular album, 1989, were actually down from her earlier ones, and then she ended up blowing it out of the water. So it's really hard to tell when her last album was 2 years ago whether or not Spotify and this album would have made a huge, huge difference or not. But I don't know. We'll never know, I guess. But she doesn't want to be on Spotify, so there's that.
I guess that's the other thing that seems kind of strange, is just the fact that she went this far, that it wasn't just, let's hold off on putting my new album on Spotify for 6 months or a year, and again, maybe this is also just a negotiating tactic where she just gets a lot more money from Spotify at the end. But to remove the whole back catalog, which had been on there and which people had come to expect on them, it just seems like such an extreme move, and I think that I found it very surprising.
Taylor Swift leaving Spotify was a huge surprise, but I thought a bigger surprise this week was Sean Rad, I guess, changing positions, getting demoted at Tinder. Jordan, how would you describe what happened?
I mean, well, I've talked to a few different sources who are familiar with the company. No one's like super clear on anything, but I think that a lot that I've heard, or what seems to be resounding among people, is that, yeah, IAC did come down on Sean and kind of ask him, I guess, maybe to leave this spot, or talk to him about the prospect of leaving the CEO position. And he did wrestle with it for a long time, which is what the original report said. And he kind of made the decision in the end, I think, to agree with them rather than fight it, and step down. And he's now taking the president role there, as well as, joining the board. But given what happened with Whitney Wolf, and given, the last 6 months or so of the company's history, Tinder's at a really crucial point where it could monetize, and it could become, one of these unicorn companies that we remember, that becomes, kind of a classic hit that we don't forget about. Or it could, be kind of wrestled down by these issues that it's had. And given the fact that it's a dating app and it's meant for people to hook up, and then there's kind of all of this baggage around sexual harassment and discrimination and things like that. No matter what happened, the fact that the conversation is happening makes it really difficult, I think, for them at this pivotal moment, whether or not Sean was directly involved, or, was completely in the wrong or not. When the settlement came out, no one admitted guilt. So I think
the settlement with Whitney Wolf.
The settlement with Whitney Wolf, no one admitted guilt on either side. So at the end of the day, you can consider that a wash, but you can't really, because it's tarnished the company in a way that isn't really safe for a dating app that's trying to monetize, right? So
do you really feel like with the average Tinder user, that had a big impact on how they see the company?
I don't, and I honestly think that Sean is the best person to lead the company. But I also think that, unfortunately, he never really had complete control. I think at his greatest moment, he had about 10% stake. So, knowing that, it's really hard to keep control of a company that is owned by such a huge corporation that has so many different interests that they have to focus on. They have Match, and they have OkCupid.
So they've said, though, that they want an Eric Schmidt style CEO. What does that mean for a dating app? I mean, what kind of person do they want?
I don't think they know what that means. I do know that Tinder made a big hire, and they hired a VP from Amazon that was really supposed to help scale and help them figure out how to match people really, really quickly based on, more targeted stuff. And they did say, Sean told me in an interview recently that they are going to start thinking about more targeted searching. And so I think they do want someone who can do the math behind scaling a company that has to process so much data so quickly, and more of a business side of things. But I think that Sean really understood the spirit of what Tinder's supposed to be about, and tried to keep it safe and also fun and also simple and also accessible. And he did those things really well. And I don't know how it's going to change.
I feel like also when people say Eric Schmidt CEO, that's also just a way of saying, oh, it's a CEO, a non-founder CEO who didn't screw it up. And it's a sign maybe that they don't really know.
Right. They want an Eric Schmidt and not a John Scully, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. The impression I got was serious business person, the opposite of a young guy.
Yeah, like an uncle, like someone that you would never think would.
Right. And I think one of the points that that they make in the original coverage was this idea of that this whole scandal, regardless of how it affected consumer perception, really I think hammered home with I guess the press and with their superiors at IAC, this idea that this company they created this sense that the company is being run by these people who are not completely competent adults, running people you'd want running $1 billion business, essentially, right?
So,
and I think they did make bad choices, but I think that if it wasn't a company that was born into a corporation, then those bad choices would not ruin his chances of being the CEO. I look at Evan Spiegel. Evan Spiegel's made all kinds of horrible decisions, and his dirty laundry's been hung out to dry, and he's still in charge of Snapchat. Snapchat's still doing well. His investors haven't punished him, in any way that we know of. So,
right, a lot of it has
sucks
to do with
that
Tinder's corporate structure.
Tinder was born into a corporation from an accelerator.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say that most Tinder users probably don't know or care about any of this drama that's happening behind the scenes. So, I feel like there's very little effect in the near term as far as growth. What
they
that'll
will
do.
They will care about. I mean, that they're rolling. This is happening at the same time that they're rolling out paid features.
Exactly,
right?
and that's where it's really just
that.
becomes very sensitive, because if they roll out paid features and this new leader comes in and does that in a way that keeps people super, super happy, then bravo, because that sounds really, really difficult. For me, if I was making the bet and I was in charge of IAC, I would want to keep Sean there just because he knows, he's been there for the last 3-4 years and knows exactly what his users will and won't tolerate. And so I think that having that kind of decision making during this time is important. That said, he's still going to be in the president role. He's still going to be making decisions as part of the board. So,
and he still owns a ton of the company. So like he's still incentivized to make good decisions. I mean, I think it's part of why he stuck around in the first place.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think that'll be it for this week. Thanks for phoning in from New York.
Thanks for having us, Kyle.
Yep.